Look closely at this photograph. At first it appears ordinary, a formal portrait from the 1860s. Three young women sit poised in elegant silk gowns, their posture refined, their expressions composed. It's the kind of image you might pass in a museum without giving it much thought. But in 2019, one historian noticed something others had missed for more than a century. Something hidden in plain sight, not in their faces, not in their clothing, but in their hands. What she uncovered would challenge long-held assumptions about resistance during the Civil War. These women weren't simply posing for a portrait. They were communicating, sending a message their captors never recognized. If stories like this intrigue you, stay with me, because what comes next changes everything. It was a stormy autumn evening in Richmond, Virginia. Rain tapped steadily against the tall windows of Harrison's auction house as Dr. Amelia Grant examined a newly acquired collection of Civil War-era photographs. At 43, she had spent over 20 years studying American history at Howard University. She thought she had seen it all. She was wrong. The collection had belonged to an antiques dealer who had spent decades gathering artifacts from the antebellum South. Most of the photographs were predictable: posed families, plantation homes, stiff gatherings frozen in time. But then Amelia's attention caught on one image. Three young black women sat in a richly decorated parlor. Their dresses were exquisite, far too luxurious for what history would suggest was possible for black women in Confederate Charleston in 1863. Their posture was flawless, their expressions calm, but it was their hands that made Amelia pause. Each woman held her hands differently. The eldest rested her right hand over her left, fingers slightly apart. The middle sister clasped her hands, but her thumbs crossed in a peculiar way. The youngest placed one hand flat while the other formed a subtle shape against her skirt. At first glance, it could have been artistic choice, but something about it felt intentional. She turned the photograph over. Written faintly on the back were the words, "The Kingsley Sisters, Charleston, 1863. "Find something unusual?" Marcus Webb, the auction director, asked as he approached. "These women," Amelia replied softly. "Do you know who they were?" Marcus shook his head. "No records. We assumed they were free women of color. The clothing suggests wealth." Amelia studied the image again. Something didn't add up. Charleston in 1863 was firmly under Confederate control. The idea of three black women commissioning such a portrait seemed unlikely, almost impossible. "I want to buy this," she said. "It's part of a full collection," Marcus replied. "Then I'll take the collection." Back at her office, Amelia began her search. She combed through census data, church records, tax documents, anything that might reveal the identity of the Kingsley family. Days passed, nothing surfaced. "It's like they never existed," she muttered. Her assistant David leaned back in his chair. "Maybe that's the point. What if the name isn't real?" The idea stuck. Amelia returned to the photograph, this time examining it under magnification. In the corner, barely visible, she noticed a tiny embossed mark, J.R. Whitmore, Charleston. Research revealed that Jonathan Whitmore had operated a photography studio during the Civil War, a white man from a respected Southern family, known for documenting Charleston's elite. But there was more. After the war, he had relocated to Boston and quietly supported abolitionist causes. That shift raised questions. The next day, Amelia boarded a plane to Charleston. The city greeted her with heavy air and lingering heat. She headed straight to the archives, where an elderly archivist named Dorothy listened carefully to her story. "Whitmore," Dorothy repeated. "My grandmother used to mention him, not just a photographer, something more." She led Amelia to a restricted archive and retrieved a worn leather journal. "It was donated anonymously decades ago," Dorothy explained. "Later, someone identified the handwriting as Whitmore S." Amelia opened it carefully. The entries were cryptic, references to deliveries, routes, confirmations. Then she found a dated entry. "The three sisters sat for their portrait today. The message is embedded." Amelia froze. Whitmore had been using photographs as coded communication. As she read further, the truth began to emerge. The women were not the Kingsley sisters. Their names were Clara, Ruth, and Viola, escaped from a Georgia plantation and living under false identities. But they weren't just hiding. They were operating. Whitmore described a system they had developed together. Hand positions, fabric patterns, even posture, everything carried meaning. Safe routes, danger zones, timing, names. The photographs were passed through networks disguised as art. To the untrained eye, they were harmless portraits. To those who knew He code, they were instructions. They were hiding messages in plain sight, Amelia later explained to David. No one questioned it because no one imagined they could. Whitmore's journal referenced dozens of such photographs, each one part of a larger communication network. One entry stood out. The very photograph Amelia had found confirmed a specific river route was safe. Months later, a major rescue mission freed hundreds of enslaved people along that same route. The connection was undeniable. Determined to learn more, Amelia tracked down the descendants of a white family mentioned in the journal, people who had secretly sheltered the sisters. The family's records were held by an elderly woman named Helen. "My ancestors appeared loyal to the Confederacy," Helen said carefully, "but appearances can be deceiving." She revealed that her great-great-grandmother had run a seamstress business. On the surface, it was ordinary. In reality, it was a front. Her husband, a Confederate officer, had access to sensitive military information. He passed it to his wife. She encoded it into dress designs, patterns, stitching, lace arrangements. The seamstresses, Clara, Ruth, and Viola, turned those designs into wearable messages. "And the photographs?" Amelia asked. Helen nodded. "They completed the message." From a drawer, she retrieved a small booklet. "A cipher guide," she explained. Inside were symbols and meanings, lace patterns indicating numbers, stripes signaling danger, floral designs marking safe passage. Amelia realized the full scope. The dresses weren't just clothing, they were maps. Returning to her workspace, she began decoding the photograph piece by piece. Every detail mattered: the hand positions, the stitching, the arrangement of buttons. Days turned into nights as she worked. And slowly, the message began to reveal itself. The message hidden within the March 1863 photograph was far more intricate than Amelia had first imagined. Every detail carried meaning. Clara's hand position pointed to a specific window of time, the first week of June. Ruth's clasped hands with her thumbs crossed in that unusual pattern marked a location, the Combahee River ferry crossing. Viola's flat palm paired with gently curved fingers indicated a number, close to 700. But the hands were only part of the story. The dresses themselves revealed even more. The lace stitched along Clara's collar signaled that Union gunboats would be present, offering protection. The pattern and number of buttons lining Ruth's sleeves confirmed that trusted local guides had already been arranged. And the ribbons woven carefully into Viola's bodice identified the leader of the entire operation, a figure known in code as Moses. That name carried weight. Harriet Tubman. Amelia leaned back in her chair, her pulse quickening as the realization settled in. The Combahee River raid had long been recognized as one of the most successful military operations led by a woman during the Civil War. Tubman had guided Union forces through dangerous waters, leading a mission that freed more than 750 enslaved people in a single night. For years, historians had debated how she obtained such precise intelligence, how she knew where Confederate mines were placed, where troops were stationed, and where enslaved families were being held. Now, the answer was unfolding before Amelia's eyes. The intelligence had not come from a single source. It had been gathered quietly, carefully by a network of black women operating in plain sight. Women whose work went unnoticed because no one thought to look closely enough. Women who encoded critical information into photographs and clothing, sending messages through a system so subtle and so sophisticated that it passed undetected through enemy lines. They weren't just survivors, Amelia whispered to herself. They were operatives, strategists, spies. And yet, history had never spoken their names. She thought about the countless monuments dedicated to generals, the textbooks that praised battlefield tactics, the museums filled with weapons and uniforms. All of it told one version of the war, but these women, Clara, Ruth, and Viola, had been erased from that narrative entirely. Amelia couldn't let that remain the case. Her next question became an obsession: what happened to them after the war ended? Whitmore's journal offered no answers beyond 1865. Elizabeth's records fell silent after the fall of Richmond. It was as though the sisters had simply disappeared. Amelia turned to the records of the Freedmen's Bureau, which documented the lives of formerly enslaved individuals during Reconstruction. The search was painstaking. Many documents were incomplete, damaged, or scattered across different archives. Weeks passed before she found something. A single document from Savannah, Georgia, dated November 1865. 3 women listed together, applying for marriage licenses on the same day. Clara, Ruth, Viola. Amelia's breath caught as she read. Add further, the record noted that all 3 women had previously lived in Charleston, and that they were now working as teachers. Teachers? She followed that lead to a freedmen's school established by Northern missionaries in Savannah. The school's archived records painted a fuller picture of their lives after the war. Clara had taught reading and writing to adults, people who had been denied education their entire lives. Ruth focused on mathematics and basic accounting, helping her students build financial independence. Viola taught music, but her lessons were unlike any others. According to one report, she had a remarkable talent for teaching codes and patterns through rhythm and melody. The same skills they had once used to resist had now become tools for rebuilding. They had not stopped. They had simply transformed their mission. Among the documents, Amelia found a letter written by Clara in 1867 to a supporter in the North. "We were never named in the histories of the war," it read. "We were not generals or politicians, we were seamstresses and subjects of photographs, but we understood that freedom required more than battles. It required patience, intelligence, and the courage to remain unseen. We do not ask for recognition, only that those who come after us will not be invisible." Amelia read the letter over and over, each time feeling its weight more deeply. They had known they might never be remembered, and they had chosen to act anyway. Determined to restore their place in history, Amelia began tracing their descendants. Through genealogical research, DNA databases, and persistent outreach, she followed family lines that stretched across the country, from Savannah to Chicago, Detroit, Atlanta, and Los Angeles. The first person she reached was Michael, a retired postal worker in Chicago and a descendant of Ruth. "My family always said our ancestors were teachers," he told her. "We knew they had survived slavery, but no one ever talked about the details. Those stories, they disappeared." In Detroit, Amelia met Patricia, a school principal descended from Clara. When Amelia showed her the photograph, Patricia's eyes filled with tears. "She looks like my daughter," she said softly. "The same expression, the same strength. I never knew what she looked like before this." In Atlanta, Amelia met James, a musician connected to Viola's lineage. When she explained Viola's role in teaching coded communication through music, he sat quietly, absorbing every word. Then slowly, he picked up his guitar and began to play a melody. "My grandmother used to play this," he said. "She never told me where it came from." The tune carried a quiet depth, something layered and deliberate. Now, for the first time, it made sense. At Amelia's invitation, descendants from all three families gathered in Charleston, near the site where Whitmore's studio had once stood. They formed a circle, each holding a copy of the photograph, connected by a history that had almost vanished. Amelia later published her findings in a major historical journal. The response from the academic community was immediate. Scholars recognized the discovery as a groundbreaking contribution to Civil War history. But Amelia wanted more than recognition within academia. She wanted the world to know. She approached the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture with a proposal to acquire the photograph and build an exhibit dedicated to the hidden intelligence networks of the Civil War. The museum agreed. 18 months later, the exhibit opened under the title Hidden in Plain Sight: The Secret War of the Seamstress Spies. At its center was the original photograph of Clara, Ruth, and Viola. Surrounding it were Whitmore's journal entries, Elizabeth's cipher guide, and artifacts uncovered during Amelia's research. One of the most powerful features was an interactive display, allowing visitors to decode images using the Sisters system, experiencing firsthand the ingenuity required to resist oppression in a world where even learning to read was forbidden. On opening night, the descendants stood together before the exhibit. Michael, Patricia, James, and many others. For the first time, their ancestors' story was being told. Patricia spoke on behalf of the families. "For more than a century, our grandmothers were invisible," she said. "History remembered the battles, the leaders, the victories, but it forgot the women who stitched messages into fabric, who posed for photographs that carried secrets, who risked everything so others could be free. Today, they are invisible no more." The photograph hung under soft light, every detail visible, the dresses, the expressions, the hands. Hands that once spoke in silence. Hands that helped change the course of history. A year later, Amelia returned to Charleston. The city was much the same, its historic streets, its polished facades, its carefully preserved stories. But something had changed. At the site where Whitmore's studio once stood, a plaque had been installed. It honored the place where images of resistance had been created, and the women who had used them to fight back. Amelia paused, running her fingers gently across the inscription. Then she made her way to the waterfront, where the river flowed steadily toward the horizon. She thought about the countless photographs from that era, stored away in archives, tucked into attics, dismissed as ordinary. How many more messages were waiting to be discovered? How many voices were still hidden? She thought about Clara, Ruth, and Viola, women who had accepted the possibility of being forgotten, yet acted anyway. Women who understood that some of the most powerful acts of courage happen without recognition. And she thought about the photograph itself. A small, fragile object that had endured time, war, and silence. It had waited patiently, waiting for someone to finally see it. Not just as a portrait, but as proof. Proof that resistance can be quiet, that courage can be hidden, that even in the darkest moments, people will find a way to speak. Amelia took out her phone and captured the scene, the plaque, the river, the open sky. Then she sent the image to the families, along with a single message. They are remembered, and they always will be.